Hi there. Thanks for joining me on Rethink Real Estate. I'm on a mission to make real estate work for everyone. Real estate can help to solve climate change, can house people affordably, can create beautiful streetscapes, unify neighborhoods, and enliven cities. So I'm on a journey to find the most creative thinkers and doers out there. I'm not the only one who wants to rethink real estate. You can learn more about me at evepicker.com, or you can find me at smallchange.co, a real estate crowdfunding platform with impact real estate investment opportunities open for investment right now. And if you want to support this podcast, join me at patreon.com/rethink real estate, where there are special opportunities for my friends and followers. Today I'm talking with Scott Ellett, co-founder of Fabric Workshop, a company focused on low-carbon, mass timber building technologies for California's livable future. Scott is designing a proprietary hollow-core mass timber plate, column, and wall system that uses 50% less wood fiber and will cost 10 to 35% less overall than for a CLT structure. His system will also provide installation benefits, like integrated MEP, acoustic, and fire performance. And as if that is not enough, Scott is also designing a robotic fabrication facility to anchor a new wood product innovation campus in California to help in the state's wildfire efforts. Scott's background is an unlikely one for an entrepreneur in mass timber. He spent years in the production and logistics management of concerts, private and corporate events, and national experiential marketing campaigns, before pivoting to system design strategies that leveraged research, data, and design to meet high-level business objectives. While consulting for some of the largest companies in the real estate and construction space, Scott recognized a massive need for desirable middle-income housing that wasn't being met by the market. So he left his agency and started on the journey of what would become Fabric Workshop. This is a story of sheer stick-to-itness. If you'd like to join me in my quest to rethink real estate, there are two simple things you can do. Share this podcast or go to patreon.com/rethink real estate to learn about special opportunities for my friends and followers, and subscribe if you can. Hello, Scott. I'm so pleased to have you on my show.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it's great to be here.
So you've had a fascinating and pretty astounding career, from concert and event management to design and strategic consulting to property technology. So I wanted to start with what you're doing right now. What are you doing right now?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so we are have created a company called Fabric Workshop, and we are pioneering a new kind of next generation mass timber remanufacturer in California, and a digital and robotic fabrication facility to bring those next generation mass timber panels to life.
So what does a next generation mass timber panel mean?
Yeah, so we kind of started our journey looking at the cost of housing. And, as you mentioned, I worked as a design strategy consultant for many years. And I kind of had run my course in that career and was looking for something new and something a bit more impactful. And really started looking at housing, which was the most kind of pressing thing in my life as I was starting a family and seeing how so many of my friends and peers in California were, leaving the state because of the cost of housing, or were, in a constant state of financial and mental pressure due to housing. And I also consulted with quite a few of really large companies just by chance in my design consulting days. Worked with some of the largest companies in the housing and real estate space in the United States, and just saw this kind of looming existential crisis around housing affordability. And when housing affordability comes up, we love to kind of tout out the perennial teachers and firefighters as our benchmarks for who can afford housing. But what we were seeing was that housing was really kind of impacting bankers and doctors. We were talking to doctors who were having to have roommates in the Bay Area because they couldn't afford the housing.
Wow.
And so there was this kind of big question of like, how do we make housing? How do we create housing in California that's affordable to what middle income folks, what we would traditionally call the middle class. And so that started us down a really long journey, and looking at, it was a year-long process of just listening and asking questions and sitting in the back of rooms and talking with as many folks in the industry as possible. And it became really clear that, how we build and the type of projects we build were really kind of fundamental to, this seems kind of obvious, but, kind of fundamental to the cost of housing. And so, we really started to look at how we can build things differently, and what were the technologies available out there to help kind of offset these costs.
So let's just back up a bit. Like, for some people who are listening, they may not know what mass timber is, which is kind of all the rage in the architecture building industry, but perhaps not something that most people know about.
Yeah, so mass timber is kind of the catch-all phrase for what is a range of engineered wood products similar to glulam beams. The most prominent is cross-laminated timber, or CLT. That's the type that you'll see toted out most often. And what CLT is just that. It's cross-thatched, kind of cross-threaded dimensional lumber, so 2x6s and 2x4s, laid out in a giant press with glue. And then that press puts extreme pressure on those panels and that glue and turns it into essentially a giant butcher block. It turns it into more or less a solid piece of wood. And those panels can be 12 feet tall and 12 inches wide and 40 feet long, or larger in some cases.
Smaller, non-structural pieces of wood glued together and engineered in such a way that they become much larger structural elements.
Yes, and then they take on some really incredible structural properties. So, they are, stronger and lighter than steel, stronger and lighter than concrete. It's an incredible product. It has been widely adopted in Europe and in, East Asia, Japan. And it's just starting to kind of trickle up in the United States. And as you said, it's kind of all the rage right now. Everybody's talking about CLT. And there's a lot of hopes and prayers being put on CLT as the silver bullet that's going to, save us from our cost of housing.
So it's cheaper than steel and other structural elements. Is that what you're saying?
No, that's kind of the problem. That's the challenge with it, is that while it does have these incredible attributes, speed of construction is one of them. These are essentially printed building panels. You can get an entire wall, or it takes five, half a dozen panels to make an entire floor plate of a large building. And so you're seeing buildings, 8-story buildings go up in 2 weeks, right? It's all craned in. It's all kind of flat packed, like an IKEA furniture. Pre-cut, pre-manufactured. There's no saws on site, no hammers. Nobody's doing anything manual on site. They're just essentially craning these giant plates into place. And there's a small crew catching the plates and then screwing them into place with some really advanced metal connectors to hold this together.
So the materials themselves are expensive,
right?
But you're saving time on the site. You're saving uncertainties like weather because they're factory built.
Yes, exactly.
Probably construction insurance you're saving.
Yeah, insurance is still kind of a question mark. It's still very new in the U.S., so the insurance has not quite caught up yet. But it is a completely safe product. That has to go through a very rigorous testing process called PRG 320, and that is the fire certification process. And it's also been in the new international building codes, big updates around mass timber and CLT. So they're able to build much larger buildings now. So, 18 plus stories, large, warehouse facilities, distribution centers, these very large type 2, type 4 type structures can now be built with mass timber.
So in balance then, if you can save all of these site costs, will it provide a less expensive solution? And especially for what you're focused on, which is, as what I understand, the missing middle housing, those smaller infill lots that maybe are not as efficient as a huge 800 unit building, but certainly help to kind of just stitch cities together, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So when we were looking at CLT, we wanted all the benefits of CLT, but without the biggest drawback. And the biggest drawback of CLT, or there's a couple other variants like DLT, which is dowel laminated timber, which is they use wooden dowels to connect the boards together, or NLT, which is nail laminated timber, which is just the boards are stuck together with nails. The biggest drawback with them with those technologies is they just use a lot of wood. There's just no way around it. It's a giant butcher block. And so, and it uses dimensional lumber. It's the same lumber that stick frame builders use and modular builders use. When you go to Home Depot and buy, Doug fir for your deck, that's the same stuff that goes into CLT. And so, as a commodity product, and using a lot of commodity product, it's just susceptible to high prices, and that there's just no way around that. And so, I don't know how anybody that's started a CLT project a year ago is going to make those projects pencil today with the cost of, dimensional lumber up. It's up, 200% or something like that over, year over year, right?
Why is it up so high?
Yeah, so
I'm sorry, I'm completely new to this, so I'm learning.
No, absolutely, yeah, no, this is we are incredibly focused on the forestry and supply side. We are kind of a hybrid between a housing prefab remanufacturer and a forestry company, particularly the wildfire side. So I can definitely share more on that. And so the implications on the lumber costs are, COVID had a big impact. Lumber prices were already going up, right? There was just limited supply. There's limited companies involved in the forestry space, and everybody's going after the same suppliers, right? Like, in the U.S., the dimensional lumber comes on the West Coast, comes primarily from British Columbia, Washington, and Oregon, and Idaho and Montana to a lesser extent. But those are the three kind of major producing markets. And everybody's buying it, right? And even if you're on the East Coast, a lot of people want that, like the aesthetic and material qualities of West Coast feedstock, and it's primarily Doug fir. That's what everybody wants, and so there's just high demand. It's just a supply and demand, and then COVID came and just threw a giant wrench into all of that. The mills shut down, the logging shut down, and everybody thought the housing and construction industry would collapse with COVID. But just the opposite happened, right? There was a huge remodel boom, a huge push for new homes in the suburbs. People were trying to, get more space, and so, the knock-on effects of that are that an industry that was already under high kind of, demand pressures is now under extreme demand pressures, and then they took their capacity offline for a period of time with COVID, and now they're just trying to play catch up. And the industry in 2019 was already at record highs, and now it's just through the roof. OSB board, plywood, all of it down the stack is all impacted by this. And so wood prices are just really high. So CLT or DLT, NLT, they're just going to be less price competitive now than they were before.
Interesting. So let's go back to what you're trying to solve and what your solution looks like, and then we can talk about how the last year has impacted that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, that use of material is kind of fundamental to our approach. And, we were really pursuing a CLT based product initially. But when that reality of the material costs, the fiber costs just was it was the 800-pound gorilla in the room. There's no way around it. We started to just do more research. Kind of went back to the table and started to look at those more mature markets in Europe and Japan, and started to see this kind of, as I was saying, this next generation of mass timber products coming out, where they've already kind of gone through that and recognized that, a CLT panel is not necessarily the ideal product for a lot of building types, particularly smaller and faster buildings.
Mm-hmm.
And so what they're using now is what are kind of known as cassette systems. These are a panelized approach, just like CLT, but they're taking the fiber out. And so what they're doing is there'll be, more or less, there's like two kind of sandwich layers, a top and a bottom, and then a structure on the inside of those two sandwich pieces that give it the structural integrity. So you get a box-like panel with a hollow core, and that removes a substantial amount, 50, 60% of the fiber from those panels, driving the cost down while still maintaining the structural integrity of a full, kind of solid wood panel.
It's like a hollow core door, but not as flimsy.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, a hollow core door that you can build an 8-story building out of.
Yeah.
There's a membrane, a structure on the inside of that hollow core that gives it its strength. Ingenuity at play here. Companies are now taking advantage of that cavity to include, things that would normally be exposed in a CLT building. So CLT with the solid wooden plates, all of your MEP systems, your electrical, your plumbing, your lighting, all of that can't run in the middle of the plate. It's solid wood, right? So it has to be hung underneath or run in interior walls or both in most cases. But with these hollow core cassette systems, you can actually run those MEP systems inside the cavity of the floor plate. So it gives it a much cleaner and tight aesthetic.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then you can also add additional elements to those cavities. So you can add acoustic materials. You can add insulating materials to increase the R value. You can add seismic and fire safety materials in there. And so you can actually get a much kind of thinner floor plate overall than CLT, where you have to then, just like with the MEP stuff hanging beneath it, with CLT, a lot of that insulating and acoustic and dampening performance has to be laid on top. And it's generally a really thick concrete layer that's poured on top of the wood panel. So a lot of people with CLT, they think that you get to see all of the wood, but in most cases you don't actually on the floor plates, because it's covered in 5 inches of concrete and gypsum and all that stuff. So the cassette systems are a really genius kind of approach to a lot of those challenges of CLT.
And it means less time on site as well, by the sounds of it.
It does, yes. The flip side of all of this is that it does add complexity, and you do have to be in much deeper coordination with your trades very early in the process to coordinate where all of those runs are going through those plates, so that the connection points on site are all, when you're doing this, it's all prefabricated. A lot of it's going to be automated, and so the tolerances are down to the millimeter. So things, have to be tight. There's no change orders. Like I said, there's no saws. There's no hand saws or circular saws on site to fix problems. Everything has to be really, really tight. And so that really kind of front loads the design and the engineering process, and all of the trades have to be at the table, very early. And so it's a very different process than a standard site built construction. That's the trade-off, is that the process then has to adapt to the material.
Just listening to you speak, it sounds to me like you might be enjoying that process.
Yes, very much so. Yes. As somebody that worked in design and, design, system design and customer experience design, all of that thinking is really and you can see the outcomes, right? Like,
Yes.
you can go and tour these sites in Europe and parts of Australia where they're being, the sophisticated approach is happening, Japan, and, particularly Central Europe, where this market is very mature. I mean, you're seeing build costs in major urban markets, down to $140, $150 a square foot.
Oh, that's extraordinary. Yeah.
Whereas in San Francisco, you're at what, $750, $850 a square foot
Yeah,
for a
ridiculous.
much poor quality building.
Yeah.
That's what we're kind of chasing, right? Like that's the end goal, is to build out this system that can drive towards those better pricing outcomes and make housing more affordable.
Where are you in your process right now? You've been at this for how long?
We're now officially into year 3, so it's a long and winding road. As I mentioned, with our company, with Fabric Workshop, there's a really big wildfire and forestry component to it. So we are focused very much on the California market. We're based in California. We by no means will turn a client away that's in a neighboring state, but the challenge in California is so enormous that we feel like that, so many other housing startups, they take a national approach, and we feel that we just need to be very specific to California and the codes and the challenges and the crisis that's at hand here, and that it's a big enough opportunity that it can justify that. The new housing element numbers are coming in across the state, and we're going to need 2 million units of housing within the next 10 years. It's just a staggering number of housing. And so that volume actually presents a really powerful opportunity to impact another, maybe the bigger crisis at hand in the state of California, and that's the wildfire situation here. And so I don't know, I'm sure you've seen that on the news.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm Australian. I don't know if you realize from my accent. So I lived with
yes
all my life,
yeah.
and it's
right. So yeah, in California, 5 of California's 6 largest fires in modern history were all happened last year, and they were all burning at the same time. Right, more than 4 million acres of forest burned across the state last year, which was double the previous record, which was just set in the previous couple of years. It's just really staggering, right? There was nearly 10,000 separate fires across California last year.
wow.
And the fire season is growing, right? Climate change, drought is driving more extreme fire seasons. And so we're now seeing, fire season in 2020 is 75 days longer than it was 20 years ago, just 20 years ago. And it's 2 months longer, 2.5 months longer. And so there's this, overarching kind of pressing need to help fix that. And one of the best things that we can do is to get this, excess unnatural growth out of our forests and turn it into wood products. So our forests in California are completely overgrown, grossly overgrown, unnaturally overgrown. We have, for the last 100 years, we've taken a policy of complete fire suppression.
Oh, see, that's really interesting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because fires are the natural regeneration of forests, and that's what I was
exactly
brought up on. They happen for a reason, so you have to just control them.
Yes. And so we actually have to go back to a natural fire cycle where we're not stopping fires, we're actually letting fires happen. But in order for that to take place without being so destructive like they are now, is we have to get all of that overgrowth that was the result of stopping fires out of the forests.
That's really interesting.
And,
so,
yeah.
But my question is why were they stopped? I've always thought that the push of the spread of cities into forests. I mean, I've seen it in Australia. As housing popped up in amongst the forests. Of course, you want to stop fires there, and that also exacerbated the problem because you have this push and pull between people who want to live in those places and the natural forest. It's a mess.
Right, it is. Yeah, that's a huge a huge driver to it. That growth is called the WUI. It's the WUI, and that's the Wilderness Urban Interface. And that growth, particularly since the 90s, has just been exponential as we've continued to sprawl ever farther outward in California. We pushed our towns and cities, the perimeter, more and more into that WUI. And so that's been a big driver, as well as the agricultural, livestock, and forestry industries in the 20th century. They didn't want fires. And you combine that with just a very what's the term? I mean, what's the word? How do you describe it?
It's a man-made problem. Yeah,
and just a desire to control nature. It was man's desire. Yes. Man, emphasis there, to control nature and dictate. Basically saying fires are evil and treating them as an enemy that needed to be defeated.
When I was young in Sydney, Australia, I mean, I remember bushfires. Like, Sydney's a huge
bushfires.
City.
Yeah.
I remember in the middle of the city seeing just red and grey sky all around me. But there wasn't the pain and misery of today, because there was not nearly as much suburban housing that had pushed into the wilderness.
Yeah. Yep. And that's the same here. It's just an overarching problem that needs to be solved, and there's really no easy solutions to it. The state now California has about 33 million acres of forest, which is bigger than Oregon, and 13 million of them are considered very high risk. These are drought affected, beetle infected, so there's lots of dead trees, and they have just this extreme level of overgrowth, and that overgrowth are small and medium diameter trees. So those are the trees that normally would have been cleaned out by natural wildfires. And because there was no natural wildfires, they just exploded. And what they do, those small and medium diameter trees, they're much more susceptible to fire, but they're also tall enough to carry the fire into the canopies of the healthy, strong trees. And that's why we get these infernos that then get, the wind picks it up because it's in the canopy and it carries it from tree to tree. And it just, creates this tinderbox. And so we have to get those small and medium diameter trees out of the forest. And right now they have no value. They're used for livestock, mulch, wood chips in your yard. And that's not a valuable enough product to justify the cost of thinning, of mechanical thinning. And the mechanical thinning is a laborious, hard job. You have to carry chainsaws, and particularly if we want to take a much more ecological approach to forestry thinning and not clear cut and carve up all of these fire roads that cause horrible erosion. The state's trying to avoid the forestry problems of the past, so it's all done. A lot of this has to be done by hands, much more mechanical.
32 million acres manually cleared.
It's staggering.
That's really staggering. How long does that take?
Yeah, the goal of the California Forest Management Task Force, which is kind of the broad extra agency group that's trying to address this challenge, their goal is 1 million acres per year by 2025. And right now in 2019, we hit 114,000 acres. So we were off by a factor of 10.
Wow. That's like, 100 years we're looking at and more.
That's right. And what's going to be left of California in 100 years if we're burning 4 million acres a year? And it's not just, this is not an abstract anymore. Like, our water for all of our cities, comes from these forests. And with these forest fires, that can grossly impact our water supply, the carbon impact of this, right? 2020, there was 112 million metric tons of carbon were released by the 2020 wildfires, which is 30% more than all the power plants that generated power plant power that year, right? So the health and that's not even getting into the asthma and respiratory issues of all that wildfire smoke. I mean, the implications on our society are bleak, and so we have to figure out ways to get those small and medium diameter trees out of the forests, and that's why we've really kind of looked at not only these cassette systems, but getting away from dimensional lumber and really kind of focusing on veneer-based products. So there's another kind of sub product of mass timber known as laminated veneer lumber or mass plywood panels. Mass plywood is panels, or MPP is a brand from an Oregon company called Ferris Brothers. And what they do is, instead of cutting the log into 2x4s and having a bunch of scraps left over, is they put the log on a peeler and they peel the log and turn it into a big long sheet. And then they glue those sheets together versus gluing 2x4s together. And that's something that you can do. That's a vehicle for these small and medium diameter trees, whereas 2x4s, dimensional lumber, is not really feasible. And so they can peel logs, down to 6 to 8 inches and turn them into veneers. And so that's what we're really kind of focused on, is these veneer-based structural products, both floor and ceiling plates, and wall plates as well. That's where we see our role in the forestry and the wildfire piece, is creating market side demand for these small and medium diameter trees and putting them into these really advanced cassette-based plate systems.
Interesting. So I'm going to back up one more time. I sense a two-part podcast coming on here. But this is really fascinating because I heard somewhere in amongst all the Impact Finance Center information that there is a company now focusing on small diameter timber products. I can't remember the name of the company, in California.
So we pitched at that event. So is that our pitch that you're referring to?
No, I think there's another company I've talked to. So we can come back to that.
Yeah.
But I've heard about people focusing on specifically that product, and now it's all falling into place for me. Personally, I didn't know all of this. It's really fascinating, but the importance of using that small diameter timber is becoming pretty clear.
The great thing is that it can actually go into a very valuable product for the construction industry, the building industry. An incredibly green product, right? Very, very high embedded carbon in the veneer-based products. Much lower travel times, right? If we're sourcing our wood from our local forest and putting it into buildings in Los Angeles and Sacramento and San Jose, think of all the truckloads from British Columbia, northern British Columbia, that we're saving, right? And all that diesel fuel that gets burnt. So there's really big upstream and downstream benefits to sourcing this wood from California.
Sounds like a whole new industry is going to emerge.
That's the goal, right? And that's what the state is trying to incentivize, is, a re-ignition. I hate to use fire-related terminology when talking about this stuff, but like rekindling. That's another one. Restarting a forestry industry in California, which is really kind of on its last breath, right? In the last 45 years, 70% of wood processing facilities in California have closed. So there's really no ecosystem to actually process this. There's no LVL manufacturers in California. There's no plywood manufacturers in California. There's very few mills left in California. There's very few loggers left in California. And so we're kind of having to start from scratch. And what the state is working on is incentivizing and creating these wood innovation campuses across the state to bring this industry back, and to bring it back with a much greater kind of technological focus and an environmental and ecological focus. And so that things are done right. And so we're at very early days of that. We are not going to try to get into the manufacturing side of the LVL panels. It's a very capital heavy side. And there's a reason why most of the companies that get into that, they have 3 or 4 family generations that have been in the logging industry, or, they've been around for 150 years. They're companies that just know how to do that and to manage those supply chains and to manage that production. And so we're focused on essentially being a remanufacturer of those products. And so if we can help, kind of show that there's demand for this, this LVL and MPP type panels in California, hopefully we can then lure a manufacturer to the state with our, some of our demand, and get them, active in the state in thinning our forests.
So Scott, you've bitten off a huge project. Like where are you? You said you're in the 3rd year.
Yes.
I mean, where are you in your process of building a company?
Yeah. Yep. So it is a very meaty challenge, and myself and everybody that's on our team is up for that challenge. That's why we're all here. We all understand the enormity of it and the urgency of it, and that's what motivates us every day. And the fact that there's not a lot of other companies doing this is, yes, it's an opportunity, but it's also drives us to lead and to show that it can be done. And so, we have to take, advantage of the resources that we have. This is all bootstrapped at this point and self-funded. As you said, this is a big, meaty challenge. And so it's really hard for investors to kind of wrap their head around it or see an exit, a liquidity event in the near term. And so, fundraising has been a challenge, but that's really not a deterrent to us in the slightest bit. And so we have to focus on what we can solve for.
Well, you have to eat. It's got to be a little bit of a deterrent, right?
Well, the spouses of entrepreneurs do a lot of the heavy lifting, right? And so I have my wife is an incredible partner, and she's also an entrepreneur, a much more successful one, and she's able to, carry us through this kind of startup period. But what's great is that our story and our kind of mission is bringing a lot of really amazing people to the table. We are working with a company, for example, called Hacker Architects up in Portland, and they are an incredibly experienced, one of the most experienced architecture firms in North America, working with mass timber, and they are becoming friends, right? Like they've really been a key supporter of our mission, and have really kind of backed us up and have provided a lot of design assist and are really helping the design of our building system, because we have to think of this as a holistic building and where we can put these different wood materials throughout the building. And so, that's just one example, right? So we've got a whole network, a whole ecosystem of companies that all share our same values and recognize the enormity of the problems that we're solving. And so we've built this great network of aligned allies that are helping us drive this forward. So it's just, like I said, we're a small kind of bootstrap team, but we've got some really great friends. And, we are in the R&D phase and getting closer to our first prototypes. We originally had our first building construction project penciled. It was supposed to break ground this year. It was a single family home in the Tahoe region. Unfortunately, that project kind of fell through. It just wasn't the right application. And so we decided to kind of shift focus. But ideally, we'd like to get a project off the ground, secure some land this year with the investor pool that we do have, and get a proof of concept project on paper this year and breaking ground next year. So that's really what we're driving for at this point.
What does good proof of concept look like at this point?
Yeah, so we're looking at a small multifamily project. That's the market that we're going after, is a unique market in the industry. Most of the construction industry and the prefab industry is really kind of set up to focus on how we build in the United States today, which is sprawl or tall, right? Like it's single family homes on the peripheral of cities, or it's big giant 200 unit podium structures or towers in the urban core. And fabric, we see the opportunity, especially considering the sheer scale of the housing need and how fast that housing needs to be produced and brought to market. We really see the opportunity in that upper missing middle range, small to medium lot, 3 to 8 story buildings. So that's really our key focus, and really kind of unique, a bit more unique in the marketplace. And so we want to get a proof of concept project of at least 4 units. It doesn't have to be huge. It just needs to show how all the systems kind of work together, and kind of bring that to life in a infill type application.
I'm excited to see it. But
yeah,
are you going to act as your own developer, or are you looking for a developer who'll use your system?
Yeah, it's kind of like yes and
yes either.
yes either. We are talking to more and more developers. We are finding that network of young kind of independent developers, baby developers. I've heard that term kind of thrown around. The folks that are producing like the 20 unit buildings and the odd 16 plex, right? Like those small buildings. So we're building that network, and hopefully we can bring a developer partner to the table sooner rather than later. But we're also kind of setting ourselves up for self-developing our first project, and that's what we were going to do on that single family home. We were going to develop that through one of our investors, but we've kind of shifted and would like to ideally bring on a development partner that knows that process better than we do. We're not developers, and so
yeah, you might stretch yourself very thin trying to do both.
Yes, exactly. And we have to kind of focus on what our value add is, and the development side is not it today. Who knows down the road where this goes? But as of now, ideally we have a partner that can really kind of drive this through the development process.
So you've talked about these materials looking very sleek. What is that first project going to look like?
Yeah. I wish I could show you some of the renderings, the absolutely beautiful renderings that hacker put together for us. One of the advantages of focusing on this smaller Type 3, Type 5 building typology is that the fire code and the fire ratings aren't as strict with the CLT. So we can leave a lot more of that, with the mass timber. We can leave a lot more of that exposed. So you'll see a lot of exposed natural wood elements. So wooden ceilings, heavy timber beams. The aesthetic of a heavy timber beam, but it's actually LVL. But a lot of the columns and the beams will all be exposed, and even wall panels can have exposed wood to them. So a very natural and a minimal, what's the term? A soft minimal kind of aesthetic to them. And very high precision tolerances on that minimalism, right? Like that's kind of what separates good minimalism from bad minimalism is the execution and the precision of it. And because everything is cut in a factory, the aesthetic is just really tight and really clean. And so we're really looking forward to bringing that to life. Do
you have the renderings on a website you'd like to share?
Yeah, on our website we have a few renderings on there, so you can kind of get a sense of the aesthetic, and that would be on our proof of concept project. Each developer will have the choice if they want to drywall over those exposed wood elements, they can. But our preference would be to leave them exposed. And there's a lot of really interesting data, kind of back to the benefits of mass timber. There's a lot of really interesting data around the biophilia benefits of mass timber, where people get that sense of serenity and calm of like being in a forest. Yes. In a mass timber house. They're really cool buildings. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to spend time in one, but they do have a dampness to them, not wet damp, but just materially damp. And so sound kind of travels differently, and you do get the sense that you're in the forest. It's a really cool experience.
So I'm going to go back. You're in Truckee, right? And I'm wondering.
That's correct. Yes.
Why are you in Truckee?
I ask myself that question sometimes too. I love Truckee, but I'm definitely a city kid. So the Truckee's, more or less a one road town. And so I do feel a little stir crazy here sometimes. But it is a great place. And I have two young kids, 4 and 6 years old. And this is a big playground for them. So and we ended up in Truckee, long time, decade and a half in San Francisco, 3 years down in Los Angeles, and then had to get out of LA. And Truckee was supposed to be a 1-year stopover on the way back to the Bay. But shocker, the cost of housing was so high in the Bay that we couldn't afford anything there. So we could afford something in Truckee at the time. So we were able to.
You're living the Californian dream.
Yeah, more or less trying to.
Okay, so tell me, I'm going to shift gears a little bit and just ask you, are there any other current trends out there or innovations in real estate development or construction that you believe are really important for our future?
Yeah. So a couple, yeah. So One thing that we are bringing in-house, we have, this is a capability that we are, as we speak, kind of building out a facility, is the fabrication side of construction, and particularly automated and robotic fabrication. That is the piece that's going to have prefab construction kind of realize the benefits that it kind of promised the world when it came out a few decades ago. From pricing to quality control, robotic fabrication is going to be a huge piece of this. And we are actively building that capacity out in California, and we'll be, a leader in that space here in the state. And particularly as more and more construction will go towards wood-based construction to offset the, carbon and environmental impacts of concrete and steel. We firmly believe that wood construction is the future of construction. And so to make that a reality, you have to have much more advanced fabrication capabilities like you see across Switzerland and Austria and Germany and Sweden, for example.
Right.
And so that's going to be a big piece, right? And then, I do believe fundamentally that we are seeing the cracks in the dam when it comes to planning and zoning in particular. I think that the sea change in our laws and regulations on what gets built and where is going to happen very quickly, much faster than I think a lot of people give it credit for. We are slowly starting to see the end of single family only zoning. When I first really started thinking about creating a housing company in 2014, most people didn't really talk about housing. I was like, oh yeah, houses are expensive in nice parts of the city. That was kind of the attitude. And now fast forward 7 years and it's a topic in our presidential campaigns. It's just becoming a fundamental issue in this country. And I think that the 20th century experiment of highly segregated neighborhoods, housing over here, business over there, commerce over here, single family based, car based, an entirely car based society, car exclusive society. I really fundamentally believe that is coming to an end in California, and that those changes are going to happen. It's going to build, and then it's going to happen really rapidly.
Wow. I have one final question for you, and that is, what is your big, hairy, audacious goal?
Yeah, I would say, not as ambitious to say we want to build a new city out of wood, but definitely, a neighborhood out of wood. That's kind of our big goal, is to build a 500-600 unit community, all sustainably sourced, locally sourced, sustainably sourced timber neighborhood. And we're seeing those neighborhoods pop up in Europe and Japan, and they are incredibly inspiring. They are walkable, human scaled, car free, no carbon, passive house technology. And I would love to just get my hands on a decrepit shopping mall in central Sacramento and convert that into the neighborhood, a vibrant, diverse, mixed income, neighborhood in Sacramento, for example. And that's our big goal that we're driving towards.
Well, I'm really excited for you. It sounds amazing, and I hope sometime in the future we'll get to host one of your projects on Small Change.
Would absolutely love that. Yes.
Thank you so much, Scott.
Yes, thank you, Eve. Really appreciate the time, and honored to be on your podcast and be part of this group. So thank you.
That was Scott Ellett of Fabric Workshop. Scott pivoted his life and career in a way that most people do not dare. He is making all bets on an industry that doesn't quite exist yet and technology that he needs to design. While other housing developers try to crack the construction affordability code using the same old building systems, Scott has spent years planning how to become a housing developer using a brand new building system, one that he has designed and one that he will manufacture. We'll be hearing more about Scott, I'm sure. You can find out more about this episode on the show notes page at evepicker.com, or you can find other episodes you might have missed. Or you can show your support at patreon.com/rethink real estate, where you can learn about special opportunities for my friends and followers. A special thanks to David Allardyce for his excellent editing of this podcast and original music. And thanks to you for spending your time with me today. We'll talk again soon, but for now, this is Eve Picker signing off to go make some change.